Morning, everyone. Welcome back to Reading with Raptors. We are back in the program room because it is pretty rainy outside today. So we're in here with our resident barn owl, who we call Whisper. And so we're going to be talking a little bit about barn owls today. We have an excellent book talking about all the different ways that a lot of different animals can look and listen to their environment. So I thought that barn owls were a really good fit to talk about for raptors, since they do have some pretty good eyesight, but they have excellent hearing, really reliant on that really good hearing to hunt at night. So I thought that was a good fit. You might also see her kind of moving her head around. And that is to actually help her kind of listen to what's going on around us. We've got all the different fun building noises. We've got the air conditioner. We have a volunteer who's actually in a different room doing some, it sounds like floor cleaning. So she might be listening to that. I think that's what the direction that she's facing right now. So all sorts of fun and interesting sounds that she might be swiveling her head around a little bit. You might see her kind of turning her head, really just trying to listen in and figure out exactly what those noises are and where they're coming from. So we'll let her hang out there, look around, listen around. We'll talk about her in a little bit. We'll start off with a book that doesn't actually have any artwork in it, but does have a lot of pictures of a lot of different animals, which I thought was pretty cool. So this is called Winking, Blinking, Wiggling, and Waggling. So here, I'll stand a little bit closer. It's a smaller book. So this is one of a series, the DK Reader series, which is always excellent and has a lot of really good kind of pictures and lots of information about a lot of different animals. So I thought it was a good fit. So we'll start with, this is Winking, Blinking, Wiggling, and Waggling, part of the DK Reader series, and it's by Brian Moses. Oops, wrong side. Eyes are for looking, seeing, and staring. Eyes are for watching, gazing, and glaring. Eyes are for squinting, winking, and blinking. Eyes are for prying, spying, and spotting. Eyes are for peeking, peeping, and sleeping. Snore. So here we have some type of hawk. You can see its eyes there. We'll talk a little bit about what this kind of milky white covering is in a little bit. We have this cat's eyes, big orange kind of eyes. We have this little little crocodile or alligator, maybe a caiman, sitting there using its eyes to peek out, and then a fox sleeping. Whose eyes are these? He sleeps by day and hunts by night. His loud hoo, hoo gives mice a fright. This sea creature is cleverer than you think. He hides from enemies by firing black ink. He stretches his neck to the top of a tree and eats all the leaves that he can see. She lies very still. She could be asleep. But if birds come close, just watch her leap. What do you think these eyes belong to? Were you right? We're going to turn the page and find out what we think this big eye is. What's this eye or this one? Or maybe you recognize this one. Let's look. Some animals see much better than we do. An owl's huge eyes help him hunt for food in low light. A squid needs to see in deep, dark water. Giraffes have very good eyesight and can see long distances. And a cat sees about 6 times as well as we do at night. So here's who those eyes belong to. We have a big owl. We have a little squid, we have a giraffe with that long, long neck, and we have a cat. So here's a note about cat's eyes. A cat's eyes shine at night because mirror-like parts in them reflect light. Many animals have mirror-like parts in their eyes to help them see in low light. So whenever you see kind of those eyes reflecting out in the darkness, you know it's an animal who's really good at seeing at night. Mom says, I haven't got eyes in the back of my head, but a jumping spider has 8 eyes all around her head. She has 2 large eyes that look forward. Her other 6 eyes are smaller and look to her back and sides. Here's that jumping spider. You can see the 2 big eyes and all those 6 other little eyes all around her head. Here's a note, 4 eyes. 4-eyed fish live near the surface of water. Their eyes are divided in 2 so they can see enemies in the air and in the water at the same time. So here's a fish whose eyes are divided up so they can kind of look up and down at the same time. A horsefly can see in every direction because a fly's eyes are made up of hundreds of tiny parts. Eyes like this are called compound eyes. This is why it is so hard to swat a fly. He can see you coming from every direction. So you can see, it looks like it's got tons and tons of tiny little eyes all grouped together. Those are those compound eyes. Can you imagine being able to see in all directions at the same time? If you were a horsefly, you could. Dad says, watch out, I've got my eye on you. But if a vulture has his eye on a sick animal, it had better watch out. Vultures feed on dead animals and can spot a sick animal far away. Birds of prey, like vultures, have the keenest eyesight of all birds. Tarsiers wake up at night. Their large eyes help them to spot danger in the rainforest after dark. They can also turn their heads almost full circle to keep a lookout for enemies. Look at those big eyes for looking around at night. Can you think of any other animals who can turn their heads really far around to see well at night? Mom says, watch where you're going. But a mole has tiny eyes and can't really see where he's going. Moles spend most of their time digging underground, so they don't need big eyes. Here's that mole. You can hardly even see where those teeny tiny eyes are. Here's what a mole house looks like underground. So here's a big kind of mound of dirt. Here's a nice kind of hay or grassline spot that the mole lives in. And these are all the tunnels that they build. So these secret underground tunnels. Earthworms have no eyes at all. They live underground. If they come above ground, their other senses tell them if there is movement nearby. Then they hide quickly in case an enemy is coming. Here's a note that says, larder for later. Moles find worms to eat by smelling and touching. Sometimes they store the worms in a mole larder and eat them later. A larder is kind of like a word for a pantry or like a room temperature refrigerator. That's what you might call a larder. So a nice kind of hole in the ground. Dad says, don't throw things. You'll knock someone's eye out. But snails don't have to worry about their eyes. Snails have their eyes at the ends of long stalks. If a snail senses danger, he just pulls the stalks inside his head. So here are those stalks that snail has, so he can kind of pull those stalks right inside of his own head. In extra eyelid, this is what I was talking about earlier, birds of prey, such as this eagle, have a layer of clear skin that flicks over their eye to clean and protect it. If you want a very fancy vocabulary word, we call this kind of clear, like I said, it kind of almost looks milky clear film. We call that a nictitating membrane. Nictitating membrane. Very fancy way of saying a third eyelid. A camel's eyes are protected too. She has 2 rows of eyelashes to keep out the desert sand and the glare of the sun. And behind we have our barn owl doing a real big wing stretch. Oh, here's another one. And it looks like maybe, sometimes when she does that, she also eliminates some waste. She goes to the bathroom. But it looks like that was just a stretch. But can you imagine having to live out in the desert with all that sand and sun? You would need some extra sets of eyelids and eyelashes to be able to protect your eyes from all the glare and all of that dusty sand. Whose ears are these? She has a long, furry tail and dainty feet. At night, she goes looking for something to eat. He lives in a burrow under the ground. He hops away if he hears a sound. She's a bit like a monkey. She's a bit like a bear. She's a bit like a baby with her wide-eyed stare. He's orange and black and hunts at night. His open mouth is a scary sight. Who do we think these ears belong to? Let's think about, we've got these little ears here. Looks like some very long ears over here. Very wide ears. Kind of furry ears here. What do we think? Let's turn the page and find out. Oh. Many animals can hear much better than we can. A mouse has large ears so she can sense danger nearby. A rabbit can hear when an enemy is creeping up behind him. A bush baby's ears help her to hear the insects she hunts at night. A tiger hunts at dusk or at night and can hear small animals rustling in the grass. So we have these tiny little fuzzy ears for hearing danger, or really big ears for keeping an ear out for any enemies. We have then 2 other animals using their ears for hunting. We have a bush baby looking for insects, or listening for insects, and a tiger using those ears to find some larger animals to hunt. Here's a note that says, keep an eye on the ears. Tigers have white spots on the backs of their ears. People think that these might help cubs to keep track of their mothers in dense jungle. So these big white spots on the ears maybe will help the babies be able to keep track of where their parents are. But who knows? Some interesting research to be done, maybe. Mom says, don't mumble. I can't hear a word you're saying. But many animals can hear sounds that are outside our hearing range. We can't hear the high sound of a dog whistle, but a dog can. Bats catch insects by making high squeaks that we can't hear. Their squeaks bounce off insects and come back as echoes. A bat can then figure out how far away an insect is. The vocab word for this one is called echolocation, which makes a lot of sense. You're locating something from the echoes. Echolocation. Here's a note that says whale talk. Whales talk by making sounds called songs. We can't hear them from far away, but whales hear each other call from hundreds of miles away. So they're able to make sounds that carry really well through the water. Dad says, can you wiggle your ears? Not many people can, but foxes can wiggle their ears. They turn them to hear where a sound is coming from. Here's a note that says, worm alert. A fox's hearing is so good that he can catch worms by listening for the rustling of their bristles on the grass. That is some really good hearing. Rhinos also turn their large ears to pick up sounds. You can see them kind of swiveling those ears forward. Kangaroos do this too. They can turn their ears in the exact direction of a noise. Some very talented ears out there. Mom says, listen when I'm talking to you. You've got ears, haven't you? But some creatures don't seem to have ears at all. Birds' ears are 2 small holes in the sides of their heads, which are covered by feathers. Another big stretch from our barn owl. I'll give that a second. Very long wings. So this bird, some kind of parrot, you can see those fluffy feathers. You can't even see where those ears go. They're probably little holes right about there where this light green patch is, but they're all covered by feathers. Oh, sorry, I'm covering up another big stretch. I really enjoy when this barn owl does those big wing stretches because barn owls have such, oh, we're gonna get a rouse, I think. Big fluff. I enjoy watching her wing stretches and rouses because those wings are so long for kind of swooping down over prairie grasses that it just always looks really, really satisfying to stretch and always a little bit silly when she's kind of fluffing out those feathers. So back to our book. Fish have ears inside their skulls, which makes sense. If you're living underwater, you don't want holes in the sides of your head. Snakes don't have outer ears. They are deaf to most sounds, but they can pick up footsteps and other vibrations from the ground. Frog ears. Here's a note about frog ears. Frogs and toads have large, flat eardrums just behind their eyes. They need good hearing to listen out for enemies. So here's the big, flat eardrums on this frog. Really big. So there are lots of things out there that eat frogs, including some raptors, like barred owls. Dad says, I'm all ears, but some animals really are. A fennec fox hears the tiniest sound with his huge ears. Air blowing over his ears also cools his blood, which keeps him cool in the desert. So a lot of times animals living in warm places have big ears too to help get rid of some of that body heat. Each of an African elephant's ears can be 5.5 feet or 1.7 meters across. She flaps her ears to cool down. Animals with such amazing ears never forget to wash behind them, even if you forget to wash behind yours. So you can see these enormous ears up to 5.5 feet across. That is almost as long as I am tall. Might be taller than or longer than some of you are tall. Those are some pretty big ears. Here are a few more fascinating facts. Starfish have a very simple type of eye on the tip of each arm. Can you imagine walking around having to use the tips of your arms to see? I think that'd be very interesting. Dragonflies have the biggest eyes of any insect. They have up to 40,000 lenses in each eye. I think we just got a nice, what we call a mute, or when a bird goes to the bathroom, just there. But 40,000 lenses. Here you can hardly even see each individual lens in this picture. Just looks like a tiny little grid. So many lenses, which is perfect for dragonflies since they're usually catching other insects. So if you want to be able to see what's going on, and there are other insects that are flying around with all of their special compound eyes, you need some very advanced eyes. It's a very nice barn owl call. A chameleon is able to look in 2 directions at once. So you can see this chameleon, it's got one eye pointing forwards and one eye is kind of pointing back. Kind of keep an eye out for what's going on around it. I think we're thinking about going somewhere maybe. We'll see. The 56-foot or 17-meter giant squid has the biggest eyes of any creature. They can be up to 16 inches wide. That's over a foot. It's about 1.5 feet wide. Those are some pretty big eyes. A fox lays her ears flat if she isn't going to attack. When her ears are up, she is ready to pounce. So kind of paying attention, really using all of her senses to get ready to pounce on some prey. When swimming, crocodiles are able to close their ears to keep out water. Makes a lot of sense. You don't want to get water in your ears when that's where you're living all the time. Ooh, back to the camel. A camel's ears are lined with fur to keep out blowing sand. So a lot of excellent adaptations for living in the desert. And finally, A grasshopper's ears are under his wings. So underneath these wings here, that's where those ears are. So there are so many interesting ways that different animals are able to look and listen. Some of them are looking for food or listening for food. Some of them are looking and listening for enemies. Some of them are looking around for each other. Maybe they need to find other members of their species. There are a lot of really interesting ways that all sorts of animals are able to look and listen. I'm wondering if I can give her a piece of, would you like a piece of rat? No? I'll just do this here. Oh, I did not mean to start with you. There we go. There's another feather kind of falling off. Right now, a lot of our birds are looking, maybe? Do you want to eat it? No, we're just going to drop it. A lot of our birds are looking, I think the word I always use is threadbare, kind of like when somebody uses a piece of cloth too much. Right now, a lot of the birds are doing what's called molting. So they're losing all their feathers and growing in new ones. Here, I don't know if you'll be able to see this tiny little, there you go. You can see the tiny little polka dot on this little feather that just came off of probably kind of around her tummy or on her legs. So she's got all these tiny little fluffy feathers that have these perfect little details on them that make up kind of all the different kind of camouflaging colors that she has on her body. So each individual feather can have a different pattern on it. So here's one she also dropped earlier because she's just dropping all sorts of feathers right now. Maybe she's looking for more food. I'll see if she's interested in more. Want this? See if she wants these other two pieces back. Still a little bit early in the day for eating. She usually eats more kind of in the early afternoon, but we'll see. So here's another feather, just super, super fluffy. See if we can kind of give us a background. There we go. So this one's super, super fluffy. I don't think I can even get all of the cool texture that it has, but this one's almost, I think, just pretty much white, maybe a little bit of tan on the ends. So this might be one that kind of sits mostly underneath her other feathers. So underneath these kind of tan and kind of brownish feathers, she has a layer of really fluffy white feathers called downy feathers that will help kind of keep her really nice and warm and insulated. Which means that this is a really good time of year to be replacing all of those old feathers because it's pretty warm outside. You don't need as many of those toasty warm feathers. You're gonna need them in the fall and the winter when it gets colder out. So it's a great time of year for all the birds to be replacing those other feathers. Make sure, I don't think I missed anything, right? No. So this barn owl lives with us and has for almost her entire life. So most of the birds that live here permanently at the Raptor Center are birds that came in through our clinic who either were injured or got sick out in the wild and needed a little bit of help from people, and then were not able to be released back out to the wild. So for some reason, they still need a little bit of help from people, and they couldn't be released without it being kind of risky for them. So this bird is a little bit different. So she was actually intentionally raised by people in what we call in captivity, so living with people, at a place called I believe she's actually from the World Bird Sanctuary. And so she was raised there intentionally for people to be able to teach her how to teach people. So she was kind of raised to be an education bird because barn owls are such an important species of owl all around the world. But here in Minnesota, we don't actually see that many barn owls at the Raptor Center. We typically are kind of at the very far northern edge of their range. We don't usually see too many of them. I think last year was a major exception. We actually saw a very young barn owl who must be from a nest in Minnesota, which was pretty unique and unusual. But for the most part, we don't really see them too much. But for the rest of the United States, especially farther south than us, and really all around the world, barn owls are such an important species. You can find them on every continent except for Antarctica, which makes sense. It's pretty chilly down there. Not a lot of good small mice and things to eat down there. So you can find them everywhere else, though. So we thought it was really, really important to be able to teach people about barn owls specifically, since they are so important around the world. So that is why this barn owl actually lives with us. Oh, a really good question. How long does it take for a raptor to be a teaching bird? So it kind of depends a little bit. Sometimes you can kind of divvy it up a little bit by species. There are some types of raptors that just tend to kind of adapt better. Really good stretch. which makes a lot of sense given what we call their natural history, or kind of what their lifestyle is out in the wild. So something like a red-tailed hawk, who's a pretty large raptor, doesn't really have any natural predators, certainly needs to keep an eye out, but is very good at sitting and waiting and figuring out what it needs to do to get food. That's a bird who can adapt pretty well, in a lot of cases, to kind of living with people, especially kind of figuring out, okay, what do I need to do to get food? Because that's how we do a lot of our training of birds. So you have something like that. That might not take very long. It might take just a few months, maybe half a year, to be able to train that kind of bird to be really comfortable around people to the point where they could go out and do programs in front of big audiences. You have some other types of raptors that might take a little bit longer. It might just be that individual. It might be they're part of a species that tends to take a little bit more time. So something like a very small owl, like a northern saw-whet owl. That's an owl who has to spend a lot of time being very sure that there aren't any predators around. Might take a little bit longer to get them very comfortable with us big predators being around. So that could take maybe up to a year or so. So it really depends on the individual bird and a little bit on kind of their species as well, to kind of how quickly they can kind of adapt to that. So for most of them, could be a couple months, could be up to a year or more until they're really ready to go out and do programs, or even just be kind of on display when we are able to have people in the building is usually the answer that I give. We'll see. Now it might be a little bit different, so it'll be actually kind of interesting to see what that's like kind of as we go forward into this kind of next year or so, to kind of see what that process looks like. So really good question. Gets a little bit more complicated. But yeah, so this particular barn owl. She's kind of in her mid-teens right now. I want to say she's about 13 or 14 years old this year. And has been with us for pretty much that entire time. Been teaching people. Mostly she is here on site. Occasionally goes out, but for the most part is here so that when people are able to come on site, we've got a great example of a barn owl. And again, I think she does a great job doing stuff on camera too, which has been fantastic. Being able to see her. So barn owls, they are really well suited for hunting kind of in the middle of the night. They're pretty nocturnal. So sometimes you have owls who you will see a lot kind of more as the sun is rising or as the sun is setting. Barn owls, well, you can certainly see them all night, really specializing in hunting in the middle of the night where there's really little light. So they don't have those enormous eyes that you might see on some other owls. If you think of something like a great horned owl, they've got enormous eyes. Her eyes don't look nearly that big. She is definitely able to see very well at night, but she's really relying on that sense of hearing. So barn owls have very large holes on the sides of their heads, and they're not actually in the same place. So I'll try to sit straight. There we go. So our ears are what we call symmetrical. They're basically at the same spot on either side of our head. So I have one ear here and one ear here, kind of in the same spot. For a lot of owls, including barn owls, their ears are asymmetrical, which means that they're in different spots on either sides of their head. So for barn owls, they have kind of one ear up here and one ear down here. So that way, when they're listening around, they can really pinpoint exactly where a sound is coming from. Since our ears are on the same place on either side of our head, we kind of have to move our head around to kind of figure out where a sound is coming from, trying to kind of hear the difference in the level of the sound. But if your ears are already in two different spots, it's really easy for your brain to kind of figure out, okay, the sound got to this ear a little bit faster than this ear, which means it's not only in this direction, it's also maybe facing downwards. So, okay, I know I need to look down in this direction in order to be able to find my prey. So those asymmetrical ears are really important for being able to find their food, even when there's not very much light. So say tonight, if it's going to be rainy and cloudy, there might not be moon or stars, they still need to be able to find some food. So need to be able to use that hearing to find it. So do they primarily eat mice? Absolutely, right on the spot. So these owls especially, they're kind of smaller owls. This barn owl weighs in at a little bit over a pound. So not a very big owl. So they're mostly hunting those really small mammals, your mice, your voles, maybe some shrews. So really small mammals. You might see them occasionally catch something like a nice big insect or something like that. But usually barn owls are really good at catching those small mammals like mice. So it's usually what they're specializing in. And again, that's true for barn owls really all around the world, which is why they're so important. Kind of like natural pest control, really helping to kind of make sure that the number of mice and those small mammals out in the environment is staying within the normal limits. If you have too many mice, they can go around, they can eat a lot of things they're not supposed to eat. They can make each other and other animals sick if there are too many of them around, kind of all packed into one area. So it's really important to have these predators who are really specializing in catching them. That way we can keep those populations healthy, and by extension, keep the rest of us healthy too. So especially for barn owls, really important at kind of controlling those populations of mice. And as you might expect by their name, they're often found living near places like barns. So places where there are people. They're what we call cavity nesters. So they nest inside of things like holes in dead trees or caves. I've seen some really cool videos in places like in the UK where they're kind of living inside of old rock walls, kind of making these artificial caves. Places like old barns, things like that. There are even some places where they'll intentionally build in a spot at the top of the barn for owls to live in because they're so good at keeping all those mice away from the extra grains and the animals. So really important for them to be living kind of close to people. It's an adaptation that they've kind of done over time where they're naturally cavity nesters, wanting to live in those kind of nice enclosed spaces. And it just so happens that people are really good at building things that mimic those kind of natural cave spaces. So it's been a nice partnership that's developed over time between barn owls and humans, which has been really cool. Any last questions about our barn owl? Right now she's kind of stretching, looking around. You can get a really nice view of the back of her. Has this really nice kind of camouflage for blending in with those nice kind of cavity spaces or trees, things like that. For barn owls, typically the males and the females look pretty much the same, except for the females tend to have a few more of those kind of polka dot patterns. The males tend to be a little bit more pale in color. So you can see those kind of the polka dot kind of patterns that add into the camouflage here as she's kind of turned around. I always think she looks kind of like a very nicely toasted marshmallow, is what I think the coloring looks like. It's not very scientific, but that's how I always think of it. But I think it would work really well against like a nice kind of bark tree. Yes, this particular barn owl is definitely very much appreciated here at the Raptor Center, just being able to see all these unique adaptations for barn owls. That big kind of heart-shaped face, too, is really striking, absolutely. The heart-shaped face, of course, being used to kind of funnel sound into those holes for her ears. So she doesn't have the big external flappy ears like we do, but that big kind of heart-shaped face, it's kind of funneling sound in, kind of like if you go like this with your ears, it kind of makes everything sound louder. It's kind of what her face is doing. The big heart-shaped face is serving a very important purpose. And final question maybe for today. So can you make boxes for them to live in? So yes, you absolutely can. There are lots of, I think last week, I'll try to drop another link in again. I found an excellent site, again, the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, has a great website on all of the different kinds of nest boxes or structures that you can build and kind of what the best type is for the area that you're in. So if you have some nice grassland in your backyard, or if you live really close to a park with lots of trees, you can see if you can install one. You can see what one would work the best for the kind of birds you're trying to attract and kind of where the best place to put it is. So for barn owls, most kind of standard nest boxes work really well. Like I said, I'll drop the link so you can see the kind of good dimensions for it. I will say, depending on where you live, so if you are living up here in the very far upper Midwest, you might be a little bit too far north to really be likely to attract barn owls specifically. If you're further south in, I would say like Iowa and further south than that, definitely there are barn owls around probably, so you might have better luck there. But I'll see if I can drop that link in the comments of this video again for links to that website. Like I said, the Cornell Lab of Ornithology has some great resources on building nest boxes and where the best places to put them. I think we're getting ready to explore maybe. You can see, one last thing I'll point out as she's kind of tipping her tail around, a great view of what the underside of a barn owl looks like. You can see that even though she has very, very long wings, she has kind of a short tail. So really good for kind of gliding really low over big, tall, grassy areas like farmers' fields, meadows, prairie, grasslands, places like that. But not really needing to do a lot of long distance soaring. So it doesn't need to have that kind of same control as you might need for some other types of raptors in their flight. So shorter tail, very long wings, perfect for swooping down low over big grassy areas. So yeah, I'll drop that comment in for the nest boxes. Otherwise, we'll wrap up here. We'll see you all again next week for more Reading with Raptors. In the meantime, again, keep an eye on our website as well as on our Facebook page. We've been starting to do some online programs that have been really exciting. My favorite is the Zoomies. You can drop in on a family gathering, a social group, a business meeting, where we can have a raptor join in on your meeting, on your Zoom call of choice. So check that out. I'm a really big fan. They've been really exciting to do so far. So we'll have more information on those kind of coming up soon. Otherwise, check out our website as well. I'll drop a link to that in the comments as well. Until then, we'll see you all next week for more Reading with Raptors. Have a great rest of your day.